It is an AGI race now. Even these trillion-dollar companies can't keep up with the open source world, which is just a far larger community. We've actually got a bunch of folks in the SingularityNET ecosystem who've been working on AGI for anywhere between 5 and 40 years, and have been preparing for the AGI race.
Feels like you guys are firing all cylinders, which is great to hear, because when January came out, it was like, oh, it's just going to be these trillion-dollar tech companies. But I had conversations behind the scenes with you and Janet and a bunch of members of your team, and you were always all highly confident that your deep AGI knowledge from, like you said, decades was always going to take you further. And it's nice to see that even coming more to fruition.
We're actually much better prepared to take a large language model, put it together with a knowledge graph, and then do sophisticated logical reasoning on that knowledge graph, and have that logical reasoning sort of coordinate with what happens in the LLM. We're way better prepared to do that than Google or Microsoft or Facebook. It's funny because, in a way, you would think big tech has a big lead, but actually, when you analyze step by step, you see, well, wait a minute, they're hitting brick walls that they need to work around by integrating neural with symbolic AI, and they're not good at symbolic AI because they haven't built those teams.
I wanted to get your thoughts on Geoffrey Hinton, who just left Google, known as the godfather of AI, himself said that he was surprised at how fast the LLMs developed. What was your reaction to him and his statements?
I think his instinct is, whoa, these are big changes, maybe we should be taking it slowly. Whereas my gut instinct, just as a human being, is, these are big changes, cool, bring it on, right? It's exciting. It's good to have this diversity of human natures involved, which is part of why I think decentralization and democratization is so good. You're going to see more of these high-profile academics going out of big tech as they realize you can still be at the forefront of research working in the open source domain.
Never underestimate the power of a small group of highly motivated individuals that want to do the right thing. We couldn't be more excited to be working with you on Zarqa, and the more I get to know your team, the more I'm impressed, from Janet to Sergey to all the people.
Pairing some of us old hands with a bunch of youthful energy, with open source communities, we can certainly give the trillion-dollar big tech companies a run for their corrupt money.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Ben Goertzel, the scientist, futurist, author, and entrepreneur. You are considered one of the world's foremost experts in artificial general intelligence and have submitted over 150 technical papers and published 25 scientific books on the subject. In 2017, you founded SingularityNET with the goal of creating a decentralized, democratic, inclusive, and beneficial artificial general intelligence. Your latest project, Zarqa, is a supercharged, intelligent, neural-symbolic, large language model at massive scale and promises to take on OpenAI's ChatGPT, but also go much, much further. You believe that your advanced neural-symbolic AI techniques will revolutionize and disrupt every industry, taking a giant step towards artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Ultimately, your goal is to realize a positive and beneficial singularity for the good of all humanity, and that you will build sentient beings of the future to be loving, caring, compassionate, inclusive, and democratic. Ben, welcome back to London Real.
Thanks a lot, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here once more. The world keeps evolving. There keeps being new things to talk about, even in the highly specific domains that I'm working on. So these are amazing times.
Yeah, and we're going to keep having you back because this is moving so fast, and growing so exponentially, I think it's important we have these regular conversations. So thanks for coming on. I do want to say before we get started, if anybody wants to learn more about your new project, Zarqa, they can go to londonreal.tv/Zarqa to request more information. As everyone knows, we will be investing in Zarqa through London Real Ventures, and we're super excited to support you on this partnership. Maybe we start off and just say, Ben, what is the current state of the union on large language models, ChatGPT, and maybe then morph into a little bit about how Zarqa is going to be different. And then I know we're going to cover a bunch of other topics, but where we are right now in narrow AI, large language models, et cetera.
Yeah, I think the crux of where we are right now with large language models and, large neural models in general is about the same as when we talked last. I mean, our last interview was post GPT-4, right? And I think that while many things have advanced, like we don't have a system generally smarter than GPT-4 yet, right? So what has happened is more and more systems comparable to GPT-4 in various ways are popping up all over. So it's more and more clear that OpenAI's early lead in this domain is not such a big long-term thing, right? So I mean, Google has the successor to Bard by now, so that Google has Palm 2, which is a GPT-4 grade model, and they're already integrating large language models into search, and that's looking like a major disruption to the publishing industry for Google to do that, right? Because if they can summarize what's on everyone's website in a reasonably cogent way, they're keeping you on Google's site with a summary of all the news. You don't need to go to the other websites anymore, right? So it's really, I wouldn't say quite a death blow, but a major blow to many business models on the publishing side, and a very clear revenue model for Google associated with LLMs, right? I'd say probably clearer than what OpenAI has at this point. So I'd say Google was caught sort of off guards and taken aback. I would say they've pretty much recovered. On the other hand, you also had this leaked memo from an engineer within Google to the effect, well, we have no moat. Like, open source projects can do the same stuff that we're doing, and in some ways they can go faster because they have all sorts of people collaborating and innovating. And this Google engineer who wrote this memo that was released titled "We Have No Moat," right? He was pointing out not just that OpenAI's early lead is meaningless, but that Google's lead also is brittle in the sense that if Google tries to close source their technology, then it will no longer be cutting edge, and open source tech will get smarter and smarter, which ultimately could pose a threat to Google's hegemony on search, even, right? Because I mean, if Google is putting one language model behind search, that's great. It probably can stop the flow of people to Bing, right? On the other hand, if an open source language model was just smarter, then some VCs are going to fund a search engine based on that, which will start eating away at Google, right? So I'd say the tech hasn't advanced a lot since we last talked, but the business aspect has developed significantly, where we're seeing OpenAI doesn't have a unique power here, and big tech companies are probably going to have to keep opening stuff up and play nicely with the open source world in order not to be left behind. Because just as we've seen with other forms of AI technology and with operating systems and other parts of computer tech, even these trillion-dollar companies can't keep up with the open source world, which is just a far larger community collaborating on stuff. So that's interesting. I'd say the public reaction to large language models has evolved since we last talked, right? We had this whole sort of bullshitty kerfuffle where the Future of Life Institute and a bunch of other folks from industry and academia signed a petition suggesting something like pausing development on larger and larger language models for 6 months, which to me, this was an exercise in sort of virtue signaling as a PR stunt or something. Because, I mean, everyone knows these big tech companies in the US are not going to pause tech development while China and Russia keep doing tech development, right? And on the other hand, the way that the pause was described lacked any technical nuance. So, I mean, it doesn't really mean anything. Pause developing models with more parameters. Okay, but what if instead of a model with 1 trillion parameters, you have a model with 100 million 10-dimensional parameters? What if you have 10 smaller models all talking to each other, right? I mean, it wasn't defined in a meaningful way. And it's very hard to pin down software in a meaningful way and regulate it for similar reasons to why it's hard to pin down software with patents compared to hardware engineering or biotech. There's always multiple ways to skin a cat in software. So I think that, I mean, the pause petition was sort of a PR stunt and a joke, but it also summarized some people's very genuine concerns. And if you look at what they were saying there, it wasn't so much about super AGI annihilating the world, although that's a major concern of many of the signatories. The petition was more about these things are going to spread information and they're going to disrupt the economy by taking people's jobs, right? And I mean, to me, if you're going to ban things because of disinformation, why haven't we banned the internet a long time ago? I mean, the substantial percentage of which is devoted precisely to disinformation designed to brainwash people in the interest of one or another elite party, right? And taking people's jobs. True. Again, why don't we ban the internet? Why don't we ban computers, right? Why don't we ban the fucking factory? I mean, the whole notion makes little sense. And it makes little sense that pausing for 6 months, well, like, what's it going to do? We're going to figure out how to get rid of misinformation online and how to reform the global economy in 6 months. I mean, I think the reality is society learns how to cope with these big changes by coping with them, right? We don't plan it out in advance. It's not possible to think through these things in advance because of the complexity of the systems involved. And even if you could think through these things in advance, you wouldn't get the policies put into place in advance, because in a democracy and a capitalist system, we always deal with things reactively better than proactively. I mean, unlike mainland China, but that's not what we are here in the West, right? So I think, yeah, the reality is development of these things will not be paused. It's good that people are thinking through the broader implications, and society is going to have to cope with these implications as they unfold. Many elements of society would rather not have to cope with them, but I mean, that's the way things roll. Like, you don't get major, hugely beneficial new innovations in the real world without also having some transitional mayhem to cope with. And I mean, if you have something that uplifts everyone, it's going to alarm some people who previously had a higher status or amount of resources than someone else. I mean, there's going to be a bunch to cope with, right? On the technical level, finally, to wrap up, I think one thing we've seen since our last conversation is an increasing recognition that the shortest path to making large language models that are less full of crap and better grounded in reality will be to hybridize a large language model with a knowledge graph in some form. And GPT-4 was hybridized with Wolfram Alpha. They're gluing it together with Microsoft Knowledge Graph. But there's all sorts of startups that are doing this in various different ways, right? And I think this is interesting to me because I've been pushing neural-symbolic methods where you put a neural net together with a symbolic reasoning engine as a fantastic path to AGI for a long time. Not because it's the only way to get to AGI. I mean, the brain doesn't have a logic engine at the base level, but because I think it's a way to get to AGI that's well suited to the computers we have today, which have logic operations wired into the chips. And also, I think it's a good way to make an AI system that's more rational, reasonable, and sensible than people are. Like we might be less fucked up if we did have a logic engine at the base level, along with the neural net wiring that we have, right? And so, what's interesting though, by hybridizing a knowledge graph with a neural net in a simple way, you're doing something. But if you really want to kick ass in that way, what you need to do is you need to take that knowledge graph and you need to put logical reasoning on top of it. And big tech is not very well instrumented for that. They just haven't been working on that. And we have been working on that in the OpenCog project, and we've been working on that in SingularityNET, which has done a bunch of work on the OpenCog open source AI project. So we're actually much better prepared to take a large language model, put it together with a knowledge graph, and then do sophisticated logical reasoning on that knowledge graph, and have that logical reasoning sort of coordinate with what happens in the LLM. We're way better prepared to do that than Google or Microsoft or Facebook, just because we've been pushing on the logic side and how you connect that with neural nets for a long time, and they've been ignoring that, right? And that underlies a few different things in SingularityNET ecosystem. So you mentioned the Zarqa project. So Zarqa is a for-profit spin-off of SingularityNET, which is aimed at the LLM side, right? So make a large language model. I mean, much like Stability and Anthropic and these other open source oriented LLM companies are doing, but use some of OpenCog to connect it with a knowledge graph, right? And use some OpenCog reasoning in that connection, and then roll out something that's like ChatGPT, but multiple times as clever, by using neural-symbolic AI for smarter thinking, and also running on SingularityNET, NewNet, HyperCycle, decentralized backend, right? And then there's another SingularityNET spinoff called TrueAGI, which is looking at bringing this sort of technology to the enterprise. And there, each enterprise will have its own knowledge base. It has its own knowledge graph, right? So you're looking at take the knowledge graph representing what's happening inside a company, do OpenCog reasoning on there, connect that with LLMs, including a general purpose LLM and an LLM fine-tuned on the text from that company, and use that to provide AGI as a service, APIs, running partly on premise, but partly also on our decentralized cloud, right? And the general idea here is we can get the world to use decentralized AI networks with no central owner or controller. We have a pretty clear path to doing that over the next couple years. And the path, it's a little bit tricky one, but not that tricky. The path is we provide a better product. We make an AI that's multiple times smarter than ChatGPT or than GPT-5, because we know how to do neural symbolic better than anyone else. So everyone wants to use it in retail with Zarqa or in enterprise with TrueAGI. Everyone wants to use it because it's good. Lo and behold, it happens to run on this decentralized back end. And just like people will use Stable Diffusion because it's good, they don't mind that it's open source. They're not necessarily using it because it's open source. Similarly, they will use Zarqa and TrueAGI stuff because it's the best, not because it's running on decentralized infrastructure in most cases, unless folks are decentralization zealots like you and me. But people don't mind if it's running on a decentralized backend as long as it works, right? And having done this, then having this neural symbolic thing there, then we're prepared to solve the next problem, which is fundamental creativity and invention. Because until you can use logic to filter out what's bullshit and what's not, then you can't let your freak flag fly and just like invent wild new things. Because to invent wild new things without a filter, you'll just do insanity. You won't do meaningful creation, right? So once you have the logic to ground a system's productions in reality, you can then integrate evolutionary AI, concept blending, other cool AI methods to boost up the inventive capability of large language models and other AI systems, using the grounding in logic to filter out what's good in a certain context and what isn't. So I think it's funny because in a way you would think big tech has a big lead, but actually when you analyze step by step, you see, well, wait a minute, actually everything they do will be replicated within 6 months in the open source world. And also they're hitting brick walls that they need to work around by integrating neural with symbolic AI. And they're not good at symbolic AI because they haven't built those teams, right? So their positions are not as ironclad as you would think. And they know this very well, although the average outside observers don't know it. So I think we're entering into a super interesting time, and we can then cross-correlate this with all the socioeconomic implication stuff that we talked about in our last discussion, which I thought about a bit on a recent trip to Brazil, because I was at the Web Summit Brazil. It was great. I was born in Brazil. I'm a dual citizen, U.S. and Brazil. So there's some connection there. I'd thought a lot before about what all this means for sub-Saharan Africa, because we have an office in Ethiopia. I've done a lot of work there. Brazil is in a different case, right? It's not that poor, but it's not rich enough to give universal basic income to every citizen. So thinking through what all this means for each different sort of socioeconomic stratum on the globe remains quite complicated. And really the difference there from when we last talked is now every fucking country is thinking about this, right? Like the leader of Brazil is thinking about this. I mean, even people who have no knowledge of tech and no interest in tech, no, they have to be thinking about it. And that doesn't mean they'll think about it productively or intelligently or come to the right conclusion. But it's interesting, like how much that's out there. We met loads of Brazilian parliament members at Web Summit Rio, and all their thinking is like, what do we do to deal with the onrush of AI?
And so what do you tell them, Ben?
I tell them you're screwed. No. I mean, what I told them is, first of all, what we just discussed, that I think decentralized approaches to AGI have more chance than it would naively seem at first. And that's very good for the developing world, because it means that Brazil really can own their fair share of the emerging global AI network, right? And it doesn't have to be something owned by US or China, and Brazil just uses it or is used by it, right? If it's deployed in a decentralized way and owned in a decentralized way and developed in an open way, Brazil has brilliant computer scientists, a very active entrepreneurial ecosystem, like they can contribute. There's a huge dam on the border of Brazil and Paraguay generating massive amounts of electricity. We've actually been talking to the government on the Paraguay side about building a huge data center there, running a bunch of machines powered by HyperCycle, NewNet, SingularityNET, running AI servers, running Zarqa and TrueAGI processes, right? So, I mean, they've got electricity there. They have computer science knowledge there. Like they can own part of this too, and they should, and then they will have a practical vote, right? Because when I say this is going to be democratic, I don't really mean it's going to be like everyone in the world goes in and votes in a poll, like what does the AI think next? I mean, you might have some DAOs and some voting. We're transforming SingularityNET Foundation into a DAO with more explicit voting and governance, but much of the democracy here is of a more loose and self-organized kind. Like if you have big server farms in Brazil and Paraguay, that are running gigawatts of electricity to power nodes, powering the global AGI brain. I mean, then in effect, Brazil and Paraguay have a big vote, right? It's running on their soil. It's their own developers contributing to it, right? So obviously they like this part of the story. I think the tokenomic bit they're open to, but crypto is still a little more dubious in Brazil, right? But and they like to control money flow of real and so forth. So because I think another piece of this is once you have AGI rolled out on a decentralized platform, then you have a beautiful context for tokenomic incentivization mechanisms to be used to pay people who contribute. That doesn't fully solve the economic issues involved, but it at least gives more of a global level playing field, right? So the people who fundamentally have the knowledge to contribute to the economy can do it without being screwed up by, arbitrary national boundaries and conventional corporate structures and so forth. And Brazilian law places many weird obstacles in the way of a shift to sort of a global, sort of tokenomically incentivized economy. How quickly they can adapt that to who knows, right? I mean, what one thing you could see happening, which you might be better at sort of war gaming out than me, is like, if AI takes away a lot of jobs and a country like Brazil needs to supply basic income to their citizens and don't have the money, well, they could borrow money from the World Bank, but probably not really. Well, could they borrow money from the US, from EU, from China? Maybe, but what's the bargain, right? So do you have a competition of superpowers to buy developing countries in exchange for giving them money to pay basic income to avoid like massive chaos, right? So there's.
And you think that's coming sooner than later, Ben? Because we talked about this a little bit last time.
I think it's coming in years, not decades. Right. I mean, I think there is a lot of friction in the adoption of new technologies, right? Like I mentioned last time, my friends who obsoleted the McDonald's drive-through, but I mean, while there's software that will replace that guy behind the drive-through window, it's not deployed widely, although that software has been available for a couple of years, right? I mean, like in Asia, in McDonald's, mostly you go and push the hamburger button on the tablet. In the US, you tell a guy, I want a hamburger, then he pushes the hamburger button on the tablet. Like, it's not a fulfilling way for anyone to spend their life pushing that hamburger button over and over again, right? So I think this could happen really, really fast if every industry was efficient. They're clearly not. So it takes some number of years for the impact to be felt, and it'll be at different paces in different countries and in different industries. I do think it's years, not decades. And one thing that's becoming increasingly clear then is a lot of the impact of AI on the economy is going to happen before we get to human level AGI, right? I hadn't so much been thinking that before. I've been thinking, okay, you get a human level AGI, it's 10 times smarter than people. It can do every job, but that's fine. It can also like airdrop a molecular nanoassembler in everyone's backyard. You can 3D print all the food and video games and helper robots you want, right? So what seems like may happen is quite a lot of economic disruption is wrought by these sort of closed scope, narrower AIs like ChatGPT type things, before you have AGIs that can abolish scarcity and bring on the era of abundance, right? And this I think wreaks a lot of havoc in the developing world. And one thing I find is essentially no one in the US tech industry gives many thought cycles to disruption in the developing world. I mean, I do, because I was born in developing world. I spent 10 years in China. I've spent a lot of time in Ethiopia. But I mean, Charles Hoskinson from Cardano thinks a lot about this. But by and large, the whole dialogue on the impact of AI in the US is about the US. And we worry a little about, will China screw up our supply chains? And I think this may be a major mistake, because I mean, the disruptions in the developing world are going to be harder to compensate for and recover from in a simple way. And when you have massive exacerbation of the gap between haves and have-nots, I mean, you often have the have-nots becoming a very disgruntled and unruly, right? And I mean, one can plot out what that might mean. And I do think decentralization has significant power to palliate this, right? And I mean, there's one project I've been pushing for a long time that we may finally be able to act on, which is speech-to-speech translation between African languages. Like, Ethiopia has 70 plus languages. Many don't have a writing system, right? If you could use AI to translate from any spoken language in Africa to English, Chinese, Portuguese, any other spoken language of another African tribe next door, right? I mean, then suddenly everyone in Africa who has a feature phone, which is most, becomes part of the global conversation and potentially global economy. Why didn't Google focus on this? Well, because these guys don't click on ads and don't have money to buy a bunch of junk, and Amazon doesn't deliver to, Bangui or Lalibela, right? So I think decentralized AI infrastructure can bring more incentivization to people to use AI to solve developing world problems. And use of AI to solve developing world problems can help ease the negative impact of AI on developing economies. And, the Future of Life Institute doesn't mention this when they make a petition about pausing AI. They're just not thinking about it. US, I'm a US citizen since birth. My parents are American, but I lived overseas a bunch of my life. I moved back here in 2020, and it's really striking how insular the US mindset is. Like, people in America pretty much think about America unless it's thinking about building a wall to keep the Mexicans out, right? And I think this could come back to bite us in the context of centralized AI. It's, on the other hand, it can also help us a lot in the context of decentralized AI, because there's so many brilliant people in the developing world, right? And if you harness them to build the AGI and to shape the AGI's mind and its values, you're drawing in a resource big tech doesn't have, but you're also getting the AGI to have a better feel for the value system of humanity as a whole, rather than just of a few tech bros, right?
Yeah. Have you changed any of your time predictions of when you think AGI will be developed based on the last 4 months? And do you think you're going to be the ones that do it with Zarqa?
I mean, I've always felt rationally that there should be a fairly wide confidence interval around something like the first human level thinking machine, because it's unprecedented, right? And so you don't know what obstacles will pop up. And also, as narrow AI rolls out and other technologies advance, we don't know what screwed up things are going to happen in the world. Like, I don't think COVID-19 was intentionally released, right? I mean, I don't want to go into the whole lab leak thing, but on the other hand, it's pretty clear someone could genetically engineer some nasty pandemic. If that happens, I hope it doesn't, and I don't see how any reasonable person would have a motivation to, because it will spread throughout the whole world, right? But I mean, if something like that happens, you could get a several-year delay in developing AGI or any technology, right? Or if US and China go to war over Taiwan, you could. I mean, none of these things alters the evolutionary course of humanity, in my view. But could they put a few years glitch in the path to the singularity? Yeah, right. And these are sort of known unknowns. But then there's the unknown unknowns that can jump up and bite you in the butt, like the Ukraine war or the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So
Right.
I think we got to have wide confidence intervals. But yeah, that said, I think my odds estimate that we beat Ray Kurzweil's 2029 date for AGI has increased since seeing GPT-3, really. I mean, I think GPT-3 was way smarter than the ones that came before it. GPT-4 was sort of predictable to me after I saw what GPT-3 did. Like you could see, you could build it up step by step. I mean, I think, yeah, seeing what these narrow AIs can do has increased my odds estimate that we can get an AGI, say by 2026 or 7 rather than 2029 or 30. Not that these LLMs are going to be AGIs by any means, but just they can do a lot of stuff. They can be a module of a multi-component AGI architecture, right? And I think, and what they can do has just brought so much more money and so much more attention and so many more enthusiastic young people into the AI field. And these are all things that boost development.
Are you more optimistic now than even you were in January as far as what you think you're going to create? Because
I think it's about the same as in January.
Okay.
I think well, about the same as in February, anyway. Let me say that, because the overall situation hasn't changed in any dramatic way since January. But in terms of my own project, SingularityNET, the AGIX token price went up considerably since then, and we use that token to incentivize development in our community, right? So I mean, having the exchange value of our AGIX utility token higher means that we have more ability to incentivize and fund development on our platform. And the big rise in that price occurred really in February. So that certainly was positive and a help to SingularityNET ecosystem, although not a big deal for the world at large. But still, even before that, I felt confident we just have a big lead over everyone else in the AGI race on the algorithmic side in terms of understanding the problem and having software algorithms that can solve the problem. I think we're just way ahead of everybody else out there. No, we're certainly way behind Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Tencent, Baidu in capitalization, right? I mean, we're not trillion-dollar projects. On the other hand, more people doesn't always let you move faster in software, right? There's the whole mythical man month. So I think that we've got a great team who knows what to build and knows how to build this stuff, right? And so that's a extremely valuable thing. In terms of hardware, we don't yet have all the hardware we need to train a thinking machine, even though we have the people. And there is a number of angles we're pursuing there, and I'm optimistic multiple of them will come through at one time, right? So I mean, one angle that you yourself have been engaged with is Zarqa, which is our LLM-oriented spinoff. And as Zarqa grows, Zarqa will accumulate its own compute server resources to train the LLMs and neural-symbolic LLMs to be rolled out on our decentralized platforms. And TrueAGI, as it rolls out enterprise software, will work with many corporate partners who themselves have huge server facilities that can be leveraged to train AI systems. The HyperCycle project, which successfully completed a token sale last week.
Yeah, congratulations on that.
Yeah, that was great, and many thanks to the SingularityNET community, Singularity DAO community, HyperCycle community, and everyone who came together to make that happen. So this is a ledgerless blockchain, super high speed, low cost, scalable, customized for AI. And this ledgerless blockchain, this has an economic model associated with it. And we're talking to a number of folks running crypto mining farms around the world about replacing some of their aging Bitcoin and Ethereum mining machinery with modern GPUs that are useful for training large language models and running OpenCog Hyperon, right? So there's an avenue where through HyperCycle's tokenomic economics, you're getting these miners around the world to basically run parts of our language model and parts of our OpenCog system, parts of our decentralized AGI brain, right? So there's a number of avenues being run down to accumulate into our networks the processing power that we need. And of course, these things all synergize, right? Because if we get, as we get more and more miners in to run HyperCycle on their mining farms, they're not just running HyperCycle, they're running NewNet, they're running SingularityNET, right? More utilization for these tokens boosts everything that happens in these networks, boosts the value of the tokens, which then gives you more firepower to incentivize more development. All this work also boosts Zarqa, TrueAGI, Rejuve, every other project in SingularityNET network, right? So I think we've got the potential for a lot of virtuous cycles to unfold in the coming year. Of course, big tech isn't standing still either, though, right? So I mean, I think it is an AGI race now. But some of us have been preparing for this AGI race for many decades and have thought through many different aspects and contingencies of it. And while I'm the primary public face, we've actually got a bunch of other folks in the SingularityNET ecosystem who've been working on AGI for anywhere between 5 and 40 years, and have been preparing for the AGI race to start in earnest for quite some time. So pairing some of us old hands with a bunch of youthful energy, with open source communities, I mean, I think we can certainly give the trillion-dollar big tech companies a run for their corrupt money.
You're getting me all fired up here, Ben, I won't lie. It feels like you guys are firing all cylinders, which is, it's just great to hear, with all these projects happening and everything coming together. And I mean, a real path to doing this the right way. And it's great to see, because when January came out, it was like, oh, it's just going to be these trillion-dollar tech companies. But now I can clearly see, and I bet everyone can clearly see the path. And I had conversations behind the scenes with you and Janet and a bunch of members of your team, and you were always all highly confident that your deep AGI knowledge from, like you said, decades was always going to take you further. And it's nice to see just, that even coming more to fruition. And I'm sure we'll see more.
I think it's important to be adaptive and agile here, right? Because you just never know what the next month or year is going to bring. So we have very solid tech stack and very solid AGI theory and algorithms. LLMs are working better than I had predicted they would, but our framework is modular and flexible enough. We can plug those in and we can leverage them to sort of upgrade the function of other stuff we were doing already. And I'm confident we can do that again. So if in 2024 it's not LLMs, it's something else wild and crazy that we're not now imagining, could be a new form of hardware, right? I mean, if that happens, I'm confident our framework is robust, sort of modular, agile enough that we can leverage whatever else is the new thing and use it to accentuate the other things that we're doing. And I think this illustrates a point everyone should keep in mind, right? Like we're in a phase where things are advancing, churning, changing faster and faster than ever before. None of us are smart enough to predict what's going to happen next year. So, I mean, to be able to adapt in an agile way to what the world throws at you, put the new thing.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.